I was halfway across the world, deployed and trusting that my home and property were safe, when I got the news that no one should ever hear. My HOA had sold my land. Not lost it, not mismanaged it, but actually sold it while I was in uniform. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake, a clerical error. Maybe a misunderstanding, but the more I dug, the more I realized just how deep this went. This wasn't a simple dispute over a fence or a late fee. They had taken something that was mine, something I had worked for while I was serving my country. I'll admit, at first I felt completely powerless. I was thousands of miles away, boots on the ground, fighting for my country and back home. My property, my life, was being taken out from under me. I kept thinking, there's got to be a way to fix this. There has to be justice. But the more I investigated, the more I discovered about how HOAs operate, how they sometimes wield power over homeowners, without anyone really watching. And then I started to hatch a plan. A plan that wasn't just about getting my land back, but about sending a message that this kind of abuse wouldn't stand. It involved calling in some reinforcements that the HOA definitely did not expect. I'm talking about resources that only someone in my position could access, resources that could turn the tables completely by the time I returned home. What happened next would shock anyone who thought they could take advantage of a deployed soldier. The HOA's entire little empire wasn't ready for what was coming. And that's when things started to get really intense. You won't believe how far this went. The story gets even crazier from here. And trust me, you're going to want to stick around for what happened next. When I finally made it back home, the neighborhood looked the same at first glance. The streets, the neatly trimmed lawns, even the little signs the HOA loved to post everywhere, all seemed normal. But something about it felt off. I had lived there for years, and I could tell immediately that the energy had changed. The quiet, the order, it all had a shadow now. That's when I started piecing together the story of what had really happened while I was away. The HOA had been tightening its grip on the community for years, quietly shifting rules, fees, and fines to maintain control. But selling my land? That was bold. It wasn't just about money, it was about power. I spent nights digging through documents, talking to neighbors, and even uncovering emails that painted a picture of someone who thought they could outsmart a deployed soldier. People in the community were scared to speak up, worried about fines or retaliation, which only made the whole thing feel more like a trap. The deeper I went, the more I realized that this wasn't just about me. Other homeowners had quietly lost. Their rights were being pushed out in ways that were almost invisible until you looked closely. The HOA had built a system designed to isolate anyone who questioned them. That's when the plan started forming in my mind. I had resources, connections, and a perspective most people didn't. Being in the military had taught me discipline, strategy, and how to act when everything is on the line. But the biggest question was still unanswered. How far would I have to go to reclaim what was mine? And what consequences would the HOA face when they realized someone wasn't just going to accept their schemes? The tension was building, and every step I took brought me closer to a confrontation I knew would change everything, but still had no idea how explosive it was about to get. By the time I started putting my plan into motion, I realized that this wasn't just a fight over land. It was about justice, accountability, and showing that no one, not even a powerful HOA, could take advantage of someone serving their country. I realized that taking on the HOA wasn't going to be simple. They weren't just a group of people making small decisions. They were a well-oiled machine, with lawyers, accountants, and layers of bureaucracy designed to confuse anyone who dared to challenge them. Every conversation I had with neighbors revealed tiny cracks in their operation. Some were afraid to speak up, but others quietly shared stories about fines that seemed impossible to pay, letters threatening legal action, and odd restrictions that no one had ever questioned. The more I listened, the clearer it became. I wasn't just fighting for my land, I was fighting for the whole community at the same time. There was another layer to this conflict. Some members of the HOA were genuinely convinced they were in the right, thinking that strict rules and aggressive actions maintained property values. It made me realize that part of my battle would involve exposing not just the illegal or shady practices, but also the way power can blind people to basic fairness. It wasn't just a legal fight, which is a moral one. Meanwhile, whispers started spreading in the neighborhood about a soldier who had returned and was quietly making moves to challenge the HOA. Some people were excited, hopeful even, but others were terrified, warning me to tread carefully. The tension in the streets was palpable, as if the air itself was charged with anticipation. Every step I took, every phone call, every document I filed, every conversation with neighbors felt like walking a tightrope. One wrong move, and the HOA could try to crush me legally before I even got started. And then there was the angle no one expected. I still had military resources at my disposal, tools and knowledge that gave me leverage they could never predict. But using them came with risks that could escalate the situation far beyond a simple property dispute. I knew that the next moves I made would either tip the balance in my favor or turn everything into chaos. The deeper I got into the conflict, the more I realized that this story wasn't just about land. It was about power, loyalty, and what happens when someone refuses to be silenced. The real confrontation was coming, and it was going to be far bigger than anyone imagined by the time I was fully immersed in the battle with the HOA. The stakes had escalated beyond anything I had imagined. Every day brought new surprises letters that seemed innocent at first but were clearly designed to intimidate. Meetings that felt more like interrogations, and neighbors who were caught between fear and hope. It became clear that the HOA wasn't just trying to hold on to my property, they were trying to send a message to anyone who dared question them. I started documenting everything, every email, every suspicious transaction, every conversation that hinted at wrongdoing. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, and the picture was more shocking than I expected. This wasn't a few bad actors was a systematic attempt to seize control of the neighborhood while hiding behind rules and paperwork. Realized that if I wanted to take back what was mine, I had to play their game but on my terms at the same time. The tension in the neighborhood kept rising. Some neighbors started quietly supporting me, offering information or watching the HOA's moves like sentinels. Others pulled back, terrified that the retaliation could reach them. The fear, the suspicion, the anticipation, it was everywhere, almost tangible. Every time I stepped onto my property, I felt eyes on me, waiting for me to make a mistake. I knew I couldn't just confront them directly yet. The moment had to be perfect. Using my military training, I began planning moves that were precise, calculated, and strategically timed. Every detail mattered, every timing, every document, every call. One misstep could undo everything I had worked for and hand the HOA the victory. And then the moment came when everything converged. A critical meeting, a key piece of evidence, and the full weight of the HOA's overreach were finally in front of me. The tension was unbearable. Neighbors held their breath. The HOA was oblivious to what was coming. And I knew that in the next few hours, the entire balance of power in the neighborhood could shift. Everything was set, and there was no turning back now. Just when I thought I had everything lined up, something happened that changed the game completely. One of the HOA board members, someone I had assumed was a minor player, suddenly surfaced with evidence that no one had anticipated. Emails, contracts, and backdated documents. They painted a picture of the HOA's operations that was even darker than I had imagined. It wasn't just about my land anymore. They had been manipulating property sales, bending rules, and hiding transactions for years. What I thought was a fight over a single plot of land was actually a fight against an entire system built on deception. The neighborhood buzzed with whispers. People who had been silent out of fear suddenly started to look at me with hope and a little disbelief. Could one person really take on an organization that had so much control and so many resources? The HOA, on the other hand, was still unaware of the full scale of my plan. They thought I was just another homeowner frustrated over a property dispute. But what they didn't realize was that every move I had made, every call I had logged, and every neighbor I had quietly recruited put me in a position they couldn't predict. Then came another shock. One of my own neighbors, someone I had trusted, suddenly turned against me. They were working with the HOA, feeding them information about my strategy and movements. It was a betrayal that shook me because I had counted on this person's support. The tension doubled instantly now. I wasn't just facing the HOA, but also a mole inside the neighborhood who knew some of my plans. I realized that the next steps had to be executed flawlessly. There was no room for mistakes, no second chances. The stakes were higher than ever, and the conflict was escalating in ways I hadn't expected. Every neighbor, every document, and every move could tip the balance. The showdown I had been preparing for was about to explode, but with this twist. I knew it would be far more dangerous and unpredictable than I had imagined. The day of the confrontation arrived. The tension in the neighborhood was unbearable. I had gathered every piece of evidence, every document, every witness willing to speak, and I was ready. The HOA board had convened in their usual meeting room, smug and confident, convinced that I was just another disgruntled homeowner. But when I walked in, armed with proof of every illegal sale, every shady transaction, and every overstep of their authority, their confidence started to crumble. I presented the evidence systematically, exposing the patterns of abuse and manipulation. Neighbors I had rallied were there, quietly backing me, their presence lending weight to my claims. The room, once full of authority and control, was suddenly tense and uneasy. Emails, contracts, and recorded meetings left the HOA scrambling, their words faltering as each piece of proof landed like a hammer. It wasn't just my property they were facing. It was their credibility, their control, and their reputation. Just when I thought the battle had reached its peak, the final twist hit. The local authorities, who had been quietly reviewing some of the documents I submitted, stepped in. They revealed that some of the HOA's transactions weren't just shady, they were legally void. My land, along with several other properties that had been manipulated, was immediately protected, effectively neutralizing the HOA's power. The room erupted in disbelief. The board members, realizing their overreach had finally been exposed in a way they could not control. But the shock didn't end there. As I left the meeting, one of the neighbors, who had been quiet the entire time, handed me an envelope. Inside were documents revealing that the HOA had been under investigation for a completely separate issue for years, a problem that now, because of my actions, would finally come to light. I realized then that what started as a fight to reclaim my land had unleashed consequences far beyond my neighborhood. The HOA's empire was crumbling, and I had unknowingly opened a door that no one saw coming. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood slowly began to feel like home again. The HOA, stripped of much of its authority and credibility, was forced to reform under new oversight. Homeowners who had been silent out of fear started speaking up, sharing stories of unfair fines, secret transactions, and intimidation. For the first time in years, it felt like the community had a real voice. My land was officially restored to me, but more importantly, the precedent had been set. No one could take advantage of people while they were serving their country. Neighbors, I'd once only nodded to on the street, became allies and friends. Some admitted they had been scared to step forward, worried about retaliation, but seeing what one determined person could do gave them hope. Together, we started attending HOA meetings as a united group, ensuring transparency and fairness going forward. The mole who had betrayed me quietly stepped back, realizing the truth could no longer be hidden. Even they seemed relieved, as though the fear and tension that had ruled the neighborhood were finally lifting. Reflecting on the journey, I realized it wasn't just about property or power. It was about accountability, community, and standing up for what's right, even when it feels impossible. Being deployed had tested me in ways I never imagined. But coming home to face this challenge showed me the strength of persistence and strategy. It wasn't easy, and there were moments I wondered if I could succeed. But the result proved that courage and careful planning could overcome even the most entrenched systems. The story of my land, the HOA, and the neighborhood will always be a reminder: when people come together and refuse to be silenced, change is possible. And sometimes, the battles we think are only about one thing like property or power turn out to be about something far bigger: justice, fairness, and reclaiming control over your life. The HOA had underestimated me, and in doing so, they triggered a chain of events that transformed an entire community.